All right. Hello, everybody. I My name's Andrew. I felt compelled to make this video because a lot of people seem to be arguing over what was going on with the government shutdown and all the appropriated fundings that they approved till January 30th. And I'm I'm addressing people who may be a part of like the silent majority is what they normally call them, and what that is in reference to is normally during election season there's approximately 300 million plus people in the United States population wise, and only about half, sometimes less, actually participate and vote in elections. And what's happening is what we're seeing, because whether you like Donald Trump or not, he's been very transparent with certain things, right? Certain things that kind of catch people off guard, and they're not the government's no longer good at hiding stuff anymore. So I made this video to try to give some perspective to people so that they can understand what's actually happening and what's actually going on. And the subject of this video is, why does everything cost so much? Okay. Now, this is the only time people who normally don't really give a shit about politics ever actually pay attention to politics. It's because I'm going to the grocery store and I'm paying $300 for stuff that used to cost me $100. Why is that? Well, it kind of begins with World War II and the Great Depression. Okay, so we'll start there, right? In 1933, you had the Gold Reserve Act, and what that did was it basically took everybody's gold so that the government could have a gold gold reserve. My bad. Sorry. My brain's everywhere and I'm just making sure I'm going in order. They took everyone's gold so that they could have a gold reserve. Okay? Because what was happening during the Depression was that you had this thing called a run on banks, and the banks were running out of money to give to people. Okay? Because the dollar was based off gold. Your dollar used to be directly convertible to an ounce of gold. $1, 1 ounce of gold. Okay? In 1933, they removed that because at the time, they saw no other option, right? They didn't want to address the actual Frecky. They didn't want to address the actual problems occurring. This just seemed to be the easiest way out, okay? What this allowed them to do is it allowed them to expand the money supply because it was no longer constrained by their previous gold reserves, okay? This allowed them to print more money, refinance banks, and stimulate the economy. And I have notes here because I'm not going to be able to remember everything. And if I don't have the notes, I'll start ranting. So my goal is not to rant. My goal is to just explain some things to you, okay? So, 1933, they take all of our gold, expand their gold reserves, and then they're able to start printing more money. Okay? That's just what happened. I'm not taking a political stance. This is just what happened. All right? Now we fast forward to 1971. So 1933, they took away domestic convertibility. In 1971, they took away international convertibility with the Bretton Woods Agreement. Okay, and post World War II, the U.S. dollar was the world's reserve currency. Okay, so even though you couldn't convert your domestically, if you're a U.S. citizen, you could not convert your money to gold. Other countries could. So what this did is it still gave our money some kind of value, right? Because foreign central banks can still convert to gold. Now the problem is the decade prior to the Bretton Woods Agreement, we had the Vietnam War, which cost a lot of money, and the governments of the central banks of these foreign governments were taking note, like, hey, they're spending a lot of money, and I don't think they have that money, right? And also with the Great Society, which was the beginning of like the welfare state, right? And that this is not me taking a stance on the welfare state, right? My opinion, We're running an empire, we can't afford it, and we have a welfare state that we can't afford. And until we address the spending problem, we will continue to have these problems. Okay? So, because these foreign central banks were starting to recognize all this spending that's occurring, they're like, hold on, we're going to start converting our US dollar reserves into gold because we're going to call your bluff. That's what actually happened. They wanted to call our bluff. It's like there's no way you have this much gold to be going to war and creating your welfare state. There's just no way, right? We fucking went to the moon. And I don't care if you believe it or not. They used money to fund that little excursion that we did, right? Whether it was however you feel about that, okay? So if you have all these US dollars, you're like, no, 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 I want my gold. Give me my gold. Because gold actually has value, right? It has intrinsic value. When the French central bank and the Central Bank of England was starting to convert this, Nixon took the easy way out, right? Instead of raising interest rates or cutting spending, which is the right thing to do, right? The right thing to do is to either raise interest rates or cut spending because that is a natural response to something like that. He decided to just remove the gold standard internationally. So now the dollar is no longer convertible to gold directly. Okay? And what comes after this is fiat currency. All right? So this puts us in a predicament because now there's nothing backing it, right? So what follows is the term fiat currency. And what is fiat currency? It's currency that has no physical banking and is based solely on faith. The government said so. This is what we're supposed to use. And everyone agrees that this is the currency that we're going to use. That is the only thing that backs a fiat currency. Now, there's pros and cons to it, but like anything in life, right? And if you're an adult, any major decision you make in your life, I hope at least, you're going to make a pros and cons list, right? Like any major, we're going to buy a house, pros and cons. Are we making enough money to even afford the house? Yada, yada, yada. That's like the reality of life. That's how life works. The problem is the disadvantages outweigh the advantages almost entirely, right? So the advantages, which is what the internet claims, is flexibility, right? So central banks can print and withdraw at whatever they want to combat inflation, deflation, recession. Fine. It only seems to be when the banks have issues that they even bring that up, but that's just neither here nor there. That's considered an advantage, okay? Crisis response. Government can print money and send money to people if they have to, or they can create stimulus. I'm entirely against it because all it does is destroy the economy. And it's exponential destruction, right? So like we don't feel the brunt of it as much, but then every generation that precedes it is going to feel it much, much worse, right? And then it lowers costs in regards to you don't have to store gold anywhere and you don't have to guard the gold. So it completely negates that part of the equation. The, if you're listening to these pros, you're like, what the fuck? This doesn't sound right. The cons of a fiat currency, this is the problem. You have an inflation risk, okay? If too much money is printed, your purchasing power gets completely obliterated, okay? Now, when they talk about purchasing power, they typically reference what is called the CPI, Consumer Price Index. The problem with this is that it doesn't show the whole picture. So I have stats here. Since 1913, the dollar has lost 96% of its value, but that, I would imagine, they're using the CPI, right? Now, if I was to use gold as the example, right? So in 1933, $1, 1 ounce of gold, okay? In 1971, it was about $35 an ounce of gold. Actually, let me verify that. I'm going to verify that. $40. So I was off by five. So now, so just from 1933, when they cut the domestic convertibility of gold, $1 an ounce, to right before they cut the international convertibility, $40, right? That's 40 times. Just that alone. So that would imply it's even worse, right? And then I've decided, hey, what is it now? So 1 ounce of gold in the current economic climate is $4,224.77. 1933 was $1. 1971, $40. Today, $4,224.77. All right. So then that's just the inflation risk, right? There's a whole nother category of inflation, hyperinflation, okay? And that can happen. This is not something that is unavoidable, right? The problem I have when I talk to other Americans is that they have a normalcy bias and a status quo bias because they've lived in this safe space within their realm and their mindset that they don't think things can happen, bad things can happen to them. Like, that's happening in that country, this can happen, okay? And some examples of really bad hyperinflation situations was like in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Weimar Germany. Like, we're talking millions of dollars to buy a loaf of bread, okay? That's where they were at, all right? That's entirely possible as long as this system that we have is not sustainable. That is the main idea of this whole rant. This system is not sustainable, and all it does is fuck our children, our grandchildren, because they will be in debt for the rest of their lives, indebted to the government, okay? And the government does not care. The government does not care about you, and it never will. Period. And if you understand that, then you shouldn't be electing people who are going to allow the government to take more control over your daily life. That doesn't make any sense. If I know that the government does not care about me and will never care about me, and on the on like the generous side is incompetent, but on the realistic side is capable of serious evil, why am I then electing people that want to put the state in control of more of my life? That doesn't even make any sense. It just doesn't. It's never made sense to me. I don't understand why. This is why I left the state of New York, because I could see what happens, right? My neighborhood in New York, Freeport, New York, is unrecognizable to the neighborhood that I grew up in. Okay? And I blame Democrat policy. I'm not a Republican. I blame Republicans for a lot of things too. Main thing I blame them for is all the terror wars. Okay? So there's probably going to be more episodes of this. This is just for me to try to put into perspective certain things for people. I want to give people some kind of understanding of what's happening, okay? And then I didn't put this in my notes, but I wanted to bring this up too, so I'm going to go ahead and write it down because this is how I'm going to end the video, is with this thing called the Cantillon effect, okay? And what this does, okay? I'm going to explain it simply and then I'll get you the real definition, but the Cantillon effect is the reason why the government doesn't really care about spending a shit ton of money is because when the money is initially printed, the people who receive it first get that full value of the printed money. And then once that fresh printed money is in circulation, we get the new value, which is always under the value that it was initially printed at, right? And what they don't tell you is that rich people have a lot of debt. And the only people who really benefit from endless spending of money are people with a lot of debt. Why? Well, if you have $40,000 in debt in 2010 and you print money, it devalues the debt. That $40,000 debt now feels like $20,000 of debt or $10,000 of debt. So there's no incentive from elites to stop money spending. There is none, because they're always going to reap the benefits of the initial value of that fresh printed money, okay? And let me get you the actual definition so you don't think I'm talking out of my ass. So the Cantillon effect is the theory that when new money enters an economy, it benefits certain groups first, while those who receive it later are harmed by the resulting price inflation. This uneven distribution of new money means those closest to the source, such as financial institutions and the government, gain purchasing power first, while others further down the economic chain see their purchasing power diminished as prices rise. The effect was first described by 18th century economist Richard Cantillon. Keep this in mind. They do not care. They do not care about you. Okay? So stop voting for people who are promising you all of this shit, because it's just not happening. It's not happening. Okay?